Hello there, Karington here from Open Heart Games. I'm here with veteran game master Tyler Hudak, and I'm going to go ahead and let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name's Tyler Hudak. I've been a big gamer for a long, long time. I was actually figuring that out. I've been gaming since I was 12 and just turned 46, so you can do the math on that. A long time. Um, Mostly play horror role-playing games. Call of Cthulhu, definitely my favorite game. But outside of that, I've been published a couple times with either for Call of Cthulhu, for either or under Golden Goblin Press, one of the small publishers, and then also was fortunate enough to be in a silver Ennie awaiting book from Stygian Fox called Fear's Sharp Little Needles. So technically, I'm a Ennie award-winning author, although the credit is definitely shared by all the authors that were in the book as well.
Well, excellent. I mean, the name itself sounds scary. So this particular GM one-on-one, this is our first GM one-on-one, is entitled The Hallmarks of Horror. So, can you, I guess, let's go ahead and jump right into that question, which is, since today is the Hallmarks of Horror, what would you say are the Hallmarks of Horror?
That's a great question. I need to kind of throw that back to you a little bit and
Sure.
ask, what do you mean by hallmarks? Do you mean
I guess
kind of,
what separates, like, for example, I run a lot of high fantasy RPGs, and
right?
two of the ones that I'm running right now, I'm running Descent into Avernus, which definitely has some scary things because the characters are actually in hell. But also, I'm running Rime of the Frost Maiden, which has a lot, which is heavily inspired by The Thing and what is it, 28 Days of Night or something like that, and those kinds of things. So it definitely has its elements and actually has a preamble of like, hey, if you want to add these kinds of things and kind of do the survival horror thing, add these elements into your game. I've also run Curse of Strahd, which is my favorite module. That one's very near and dear to my heart. I love it, which is gothic horror, of course. So when it comes to separating, like, what separates the, like the, yes, let's go and fight the dragon, and those kinds of things from, from, say, like Call of Cthulhu or those kinds of things, what would you say are the
Yeah.
difference?
So I think one of the big differences between and I'm going to say regular role playing games. I'm kind of lumping everything non horror into that, and obviously that's something that's very generic. But the difference between I think a lot of traditional role playing games and horror role playing games is in most horror RPGs. You're not necessarily playing somebody who's like this epic adventurer or legendary hero. In D&D, that's what you're building up to. You're building up to that legendary epic adventurer going, killing dragons, getting treasure and all that. But with a lot of horror RPGs, you're really playing normal people that are just kind of thrust into these bad or horrific situations. Especially with something like Call of Cthulhu. And if you can't tell from the shelf behind me, Call of Cthulhu is my favorite RPG. And with that one, a lot of times you're just playing normal people. In fact, my favorite PC that I've ever created is this guy named Carter Wilson, who's just a convenience store clerk. I just created him. He has zero, skills really. He's just like this normal student slash, convenience store clerk, and it just gets to be a lot of fun. I think another big hallmark of horror RPGs is, well, first off, obviously the horror. The and horror means a lot of things to a lot of different people, and there's different types of horror that you can put into a horror RPG. There's psychological horror, there's body horror. Ken Hite came out with this book a while ago, a number of years ago, called Nightmares of Mine, which, if you can ever pick that up, I highly recommend it. I think he also rewrote most of that for GURPS Horror
Mm-hmm.
4th edition, but he goes into all the different types of horror that you can have in there, in a game, and how you can bring it in, and so on. So that bringing in that kind of horror, that those horrific situations, I think is really the biggest hallmark of a horror RPG. You're playing normal people, and I think another one is, in a lot of games you're kind of expect not I don't want to say that you're expected to fail, because that does a disservice to a lot of these games, because I think especially with like Call of Cthulhu, a lot of people don't play that, or I've heard a lot of people say that they don't play that because they're gonna die. They know they're gonna die or go insane, and to them that downward spiral is just something that is not fun. And if that's the case for you, great. But I don't really think that's necessarily the case with all horror RPGs. Yes, the odds are stacked against you in most of these, but that's actually part of the fun. A lot of times in like a Call of Cthulhu RPG, having somebody go insane through experiencing the mythos, or running into these creatures, or whatever, it's actually part of the fun. So I think that is another hallmark of a horror RPG.
I think, and it might be a little jaded of an opinion, but I think one of my favorite quotes about Call of Cthulhu is, "It's the only role playing game where you actually don't want to find the thing you're looking for."
Yeah, in one of the first edition that I picked up of Call of Cthulhu was like 5.5, or something like that. It's sitting on my back shelf somewhere. It's one of these books. But there's a great cartoon in the back that kind of says all of that. Has all the differences between like D&D or other RPGs and Call of Cthulhu. And yeah, you don't want to cast spells. You don't want to read the book. I mean, you do want to read the book as a player. You want to read the
Sure.
book, but as a PC, that some bad things are going to happen to them. But again, that's part of the fun. I think if you go into it understanding that and play along with it, you have that player and GM buy-in for that, then it does make it a lot of fun.
Excellent. So, what would you say for someone who is a game master who's running our horror RPGs? What would you say is the biggest challenge for them?
That's so one of the biggest challenges that I have is keeping the mood within a horror game. If you have a horror RPG and you're playing through it and everybody's joking around, that does kind of take away a little bit from the mood of the horror game. When you play a horror RPG, you want to kind of get everybody into that. I don't even know how to explain it, but almost anxious, tense mood, because that does add to the situation, or to the gameplay and to the enjoyment of it. And again, when I say enjoyment of it, I mean the people who enjoy this. Obviously, if you don't like horror, like my wife, she does not like horror at all, and so she hates watching horror movies or anything scary, things like that. So she would absolutely hate something like this. But for those that enjoy it, you know setting the mood of the game makes it so much better. The best way I can talk about this is a couple years ago, actually at Malted Meeple when you
Yep.
were there.
Yep.
I got permission from you to kind of black out all the windows in the room that we were playing in. We were the only group in that room, and I was running a Call of Cthulhu scenario where the players were in like the submarine. They started off on top of the ocean. They were asked by the government is essentially to go down and check out this Russian sub that had sank. It was in the midst of the Cold War and all that. And we started off with everything, the lights turned on. I had a Bluetooth speaker in the corner that was just kind of playing like ocean noises, waves and birds and things like that. But as soon as they got into the sub, and I started to describe how they were going down deeper and deeper into the ocean, I turned off all the lights. I had bought those glow sticks that all these kids have at Halloween. I cracked those open and gave those to them, and I changed the music, and that in itself just completely transformed the game. It went from oh, we're all sitting in this gaming cafe having fun, and to oh yeah, we're really in something. And the interesting thing about this, and this was something that I did not expect. So when they got into the submarine, if you've ever seen the movie Event Horizon, I kind of modeled the submarine a little bit after that, where there's all this weird stuff going on. I honestly had no plan for what was going to happen there. I was kind of winging a lot of this. And so I had generated these soundscapes to play on the Bluetooth speaker of just all these like drips, and every once in a while like the scream would happen and these weird sounds, and there was like this low ambient music going. Well, we were so into this, and the music was helping set the mood so much that at one point the Bluetooth speaker, its batteries ran out and it went completely silent in the room, and everybody stopped, and everybody was looking around like, what do we do now? I mean, and I did not even expect that, but doing things like that to help set the mood makes your games so much better. Makes the horror games so much better.
Absolutely. And I actually borrowed that idea when I was running a Star Wars game, and the players had to explore this old like derelict freighter that had been orbiting this sun for like 1,000 years. And so I played some stuff from Sirenscape, and had this like creaky noise in the background. I shut off all the lights, and I just handed them some lanterns and whatever. Like I was like, does your character have a glow stick? And they were like, no. And I was like, cool, you get nothing. You have a lamp. And I had some lanterns that I had them play. And so we played like that with all of everything blacked out and dark, and that was really fun, especially when they realized that there was. This, and I'm not going to describe what it was. There's this, for lack of a better term, monster. Trying searching because it realizes there are living things on the ship. I need to find them, and so the players had to then run from the scary thing, and again, it really added to the tension. So if you're looking to do something like that, like if you're playing in person, or even if you're playing remote, if you're like, hey, go ahead and go into a dark room. Here are these sounds that we're going to play and whatnot. I think that can really help remotely kind of set the mood, having some background noise or some background sounds and whatnot. So.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and even it's very hard to do, especially if you're in like a con situation where you're in a room with all these other
Yep.
tables playing. It's very noisy, so it becomes very hard there. What I found also helps is if you have props, that definitely kind of helps.
Oh yeah.
Pull the players in. I guess and that's really for any role playing game. Again, another one that we did that I thought this worked really well is, again, at Malta Meatball is running a Pulp Cthulhu game, which, if you don't know what that is, it's basically like Indiana Jones meets Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah.
We were the players were in two of the players were locked. Or they were in a pyramid, and they were locked in this room that was slowly starting to fill up with sand, and I just handed them a puzzle. It was like one of those in fact, I think I still have it on my shelf behind me, but it was like I just basically like got this Egyptian like hieroglyph, cut it up into squares, and I turned on a timer and said, you have 2 minutes to solve this in real time, or your characters die. And everyone, like every 30 seconds, I would make some rolls, or make them make some rolls, and if they succeeded, then I would tell them, all right, well, this one goes in this spot, and so that they could do that. And then the players outside of the room, they were running all over the pyramid trying to find like this one lever that would slow it down. And we ended up getting through it, but what was great was we actually had to take a break after that because the players were shaking with adrenaline so much that nobody could concentrate. So like, can we just take like a 10-minute break? And so, I mean, even something as simple as that, can bring in that mood. And at that point in time, we were in a noisy room. We had at least like 2 or 3 other gaming tables around us. There were lots of people there, but everybody had just completely focused on that, and so that helped kind of amp up it as well. And plus, it added up to the horror of it too, because these 2 characters were in this room that was filling with sand, and they absolutely would have died if they didn't solve it. So it does kind of help bring everybody in.
So, I mean, with the with kind of creating that atmosphere of tension and anxiety and all of those things. Obviously, for some players that can be that. For some players, they absolutely want that and they just grab onto that. But for some players, like that can I have some friends that have some trigger warnings and whatnot, and I definitely want to talk about like. I definitely want to talk about in a second, like some safety tools. But I guess my first question is really like, how do you set those expectations for the players when you run horror RPGs?
So you mean the kind of safety expectations, or just
like, hey,
in general?
we're gonna have we're going to have we may have some, anxiety things here. We may have some timed puzzles. Like, how do you set those expectations ahead of time, but also maintain that unexpected, and the surprise and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing to do, especially I think with horror games. And this definitely leads into the different ways, the different like safety mechanisms that you can utilize for this. But I think a lot of it comes down to communication between both the GM and players. And so, especially in con games, so a lot of the games that I run are one shots or cons, cons or local gaming stores, things like that. And you just kind of have to have that conversation at the beginning. Just take 5 minutes and say, look, this is a horror game. You may die. You may go insane. That's kind of part of the fun. Running away from the monsters is often the best solution. Combat is very deadly, and just kind of set those expectations that, oh yeah, this is not a first or a D&D dungeon where you're gonna charge in at every monster that you see necessarily. It does deal with sometimes mature subjects. I think in some cases, the GM also needs to know their audience. I think that in some cases or in some arenas that you shouldn't run certain types of games unless you like pre-advertise that. So a lot of especially for again cons. One group that really did this well was Rogue Cthulhu. They're a group that does a lot of games down at Origins, and they would absolutely run 18 plus adult only, like very mature topic scenarios, but they would only do that on a specific day, and they would advertise this. They would make sure that everybody knew these games deal with very adult, mature situations. So if you were getting into that, you would absolutely know. Another, I think a good example of this is again at Origins. I was running a bunch of games with another group, and one of the girls in the group, even though the game had been advertised, I think it was like 18 or older, somehow like a 12-year-old and his father got into the game, and she kind of pulled the dad aside and said, hey, this is what this deals with. It actually dealt with some very mature like sexual situations. And she said, if you think he's mature enough to be in this game, that's fine, but I need to warn you. And the father, appreciated that. He ended up pulling them both out of the game. She made sure that they got refunds and all that, but it really does come down to that communication. I think the difficulty sometimes is also sometimes like the horror twist of the game. Is something that you don't want to reveal beforehand. So for example, let's say you were doing a game with where I'm trying to think here. Oh, there was like giant spiders were attacking everything, but that was there was things alluding to that the whole time, but you didn't actually see them till the end. You want the players to try to figure that out, but if somebody has like a deep-seated fear of spiders, it's not easy to kind of say, this is what the scenario deals with, and if you see where I'm going with this.
Sure.
I'm not explaining it very well, but
that's okay. One of the things that I have found that is a useful tool, and I definitely want to ask what tools that you use. So one of the tools that I found to be very helpful is there is a really good resource from called Consenting Gaming, and it is from oh my goodness, blanking on it, Monty Cook Games. I have used that to great effect and have really enjoyed being able, because it goes through a checklist of a whole bunch of things, and you can say, this is content that is fine for me. This is content that I have as long as it's veiled, like it happens off screen. Yep. For example, we can talk about like mentions of like there is evidence of cannibalism, or there's evidence of, human sacrifice or whatever, but you don't want to have it like on the screen. And that would be a line. Like, that's a hard line I don't. So I have actually had, and it's a pretty exhaustive checklist. I've actually had players, like, in role-playing games, like, fill that out beforehand. So then if there's something in there that's like, all right, this is clearly, like, they do not like spiders. Okay, cool. Well, the module is about spiders, so I'm gonna go ahead and change it to frogs or whatever they don't have. So with that in mind, what safety tools or resources do you have in place to make sure that the players are safe in the games that you play?
I actually use that too. I think that the checklist that you're talking about is great. It helps kind of set those expectations. I really like things like the lines and the veils, because there are definitely things for me that I don't want to be in a game. I have no desire to have in a game, and so
Same.
because of that, I want that. I just don't want it in there. And there, like you said, there are those veils too, where there are other things where I may not want it, just described to me, but if it happens kind of off stage
Hmm.
or something like that, that's fine too. So I think using the lines and veils is great. There's also the X card, where if you do start to get into a
Hmm.
situation where somebody can say, no, I can't. They touch the X card, or you show it, or what, however you do it,
Yep.
and then at that point, that means you're done with that topic. You move on.
Yep. Yep.
It's Yeah, and so I think those are two of the best ways that I've seen for it. My concern in a horror game, though, is always, you kind of need to be careful, because I think somebody could abuse that.
Sure.
And I don't think I've actually never seen this. And so I think my fear of this is probably very unfounded, but it's definitely something that could happen, where, there's a difference between, um, I'm trying to think. I wrote this down in notes, so that's why I'm kind of looking off to the side. There's a difference between being scared and being uncomfortable.
Sure.
And in horror games, being scared is fine. That's part of the fun. And I have absolutely been in those in horror RPG or RPG sessions where somebody is scared or tense or even maybe grossed out. And to a certain extent, that's good. That's kind of part of the horror RPG. Now, I think the X card, the consent and gaming stuff, the lines and the veils, that's more for somebody being uncomfortable, something that triggers somebody where
Absolutely.
you would just completely check out of the game. At that point, the game no longer becomes fun for you.
Right.
And so I think that's kind of where some people may need to watch that, but for the most part, like I said, those sorry, for the most part, yeah, I think the lines and the veils and the X card, I've never had any issues with those. They've always seemed to kind of fulfill their purpose.
Yeah.
And honestly, I didn't start doing the same thing that you had done, the survey, until you had done it. And honestly, to me makes a lot of sense, because
Absolutely.
you could put that on like an anonymous forum somewhere,
Hmm.
somebody that you don't need to tell somebody who it is, or kind of reveal who you are when you're filling that out. And it's very effective at showing what is good for a game and what isn't.
Absolutely. And I will say that I think that it's important to have those conversations, as you said. I think you're exactly right. Having those conversations ahead of time, but then also having, just in case there's something that you missed or something that, quite frankly, like I did not know until I was in a situation in a game that, because if someone put something in front of me and was like, hey, how do you feel about torture? I would have been like, yeah, whatever, it's fine. But then the other players at the table started torturing a kobold, and I was like, this is not okay to me. And it was in that moment that I realized myself, I was just like, for me, like, torture is a no-go. It is an absolute line for players to do it. Now, obviously, if villains are doing it, it's still a veil for me. Like, if villains have done it, like if they come upon like the aftermath of a torture, but like
Yep.
that, I don't know, that absolutely evil, like, hurting of another person, sometimes for almost no reason, for me, is a, I don't know. It's just a very hard line for me, and I didn't realize that about myself until I was in that situation. So I think having both the conversation beforehand, and then also having a safety tool in place, which I will say, someone said in our chat here, in my games I have pause for a second, which I unabashedly borrowed from Sly Flourish. I really like that as a thing, so it's a really easy thing to do in Discord, and that's something that they can use even if they're just like, wait, we're having this discussion, we're thinking about making a deal with a vampire, like, whoa, whoa, whoa. slow down. Let's pause for a second, pull everyone out of the game, and make sure that everyone's on the same page. I really liked that as a tool. But also, Roll20 has built into it an X card and other safety tool functions if you want to use them. So those are really good resources. And yes, kobolds are way too cute to torture. Thanks at BGX Mage. What are some common misconceptions that you think people have about horror RPGs?
The biggest one that, and I mentioned this already, was that the players are doomed to die, and that, or doomed in a horror game that you're gonna fail, and again, the odds are stacked against the PCs, absolutely, in most horror games, but it's definitely possible to survive. But again, that's part of the fun, I think, in games like Call of Cthulhu or Trail of Cthulhu. Where you've got that like downward spiral. It may not be in one game, but over time, your investigator or your PC is definitely going to start losing grips with reality. They're going to start hallucinating. They're going to start going crazy and be taking more and more risks. But that again, that's part of the fun.
It's almost funny. It feels like when you're playing Call of Cthulhu, it feels like your character kind of starts off at level 20 and then just has this slow descent into not getting any better. At least, sometimes physically, sometimes mentally. I mean, you do get improvements in your skills and whatnot, but it definitely feels like, hey, my character is excellent right now, and then they just get worse.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people think that the keepers for Call of Cthulhu, that they're actively trying to kill the players, and I don't necessarily think that's true. I just think in a lot of horror games the system is more deadly. In Call of Cthulhu, you could get one shotted by a monster easily, or even another player. I've had in that pulp game that I was talking about. The first death that we had in the game was not by a monster, but it was because one player critically failed a shotgun attack against the monster and hit another player and insta killed somebody else. In fact, now that I think about it, I've never had to actively try to kill the PCs. They do a pretty good job of doing that on their own. But that's the biggest misconception, is that it's not fun because it's more deadly, and I don't think that's true. Yes, the odds are definitely stacked against you, but it kind of adds to it. And definitely a certain type of person who wants to play a game like that. It's definitely not for everybody, but I would encourage everybody to at least try one type of horror game. The great thing about horror RPGs too is that yes, there are absolutely dedicated horror RPGs. Like Call of Cthulhu, Delta Green, Alien. The Alien RPG is amazing if anybody has played it. But the great thing about horror RPGs too is you can fit that into another RPG very easily. I mean, Ravenloft is a great example of this. Ravenloft is horror within D&D, and that's where I started actually. The first thing, I still have my original Ravenloft setup here from second edition. That was my first exposure to horror RPGs, and I kind of fell in love with it from there. But horror RPGs, you can fit into anything. You can fit into fantasy. You can fit into sci-fi. I know a lot of people who will do like a one-shot horror RPG for Halloween that they fit into like their regular campaign or something like that. And so it doesn't necessarily need to be a full campaign or a dedicated thing you do. You can easily fit it into pretty much any role-playing game out there. I mean, I'm sure that there are some where it'd be a little bit more difficult than others, but that's the thing that I love about it, is it's kind of like a puzzle piece you can just fit into anywhere.
So at this time, I am going to encourage, if anyone in our chat has any questions for Tyler, feel free to jump in, and we'll make sure they get answered as quickly as you can. If you have any questions about running horror RPGs or the hallmarks of horror, definitely ask, and we will get them answered in chat. We'll answer them live on the stream. So I guess my experiences with Call of Cthulhu is that I have killed more player characters with a mattress than I have. I don't want to spoil which module that's from.
I know exactly which one it is. So
And I think I've killed like 4 characters with a mattress in that module because I've run it multiple times, and every time it's just like so. It's oddly satisfying, and I also feel really bad. But anyway, so how do you ensure that the players at your table are, especially when you're trying to keep them immersed? How do you ensure that they're engaged in the story that you're telling? I know that's one of the common questions that the game masters have.
Yeah, and I think this really applies to any type of role playing game, not necessarily just horror. It's I think first off, making sure everybody's involved. It's very easy to have somebody just kind of sitting at the side and not doing anything, because either the group decided to go to another location, or they're on their own. So kind of trying to give as much equal time to everybody as you can. Especially in games like Call of Cthulhu, they tend to split up the party a lot. And so, because of that, I try to make sure that I'm, focusing on one group and then kind of leave them almost at like a cliffhanger and then jump over to the other group. And so when I do that, I found the other group starts to pay attention a little bit more. They don't, start checking their phones or anything like that, because they know something is about to happen to them, and they're hoping that I'll slip up and like maybe give a clue to the other group, or the other group will stumble into it, or something like that. That's definitely one way that I do that. Um, you know, Another really good way that I found, and again, this probably applies more. Well, actually, no, I would say this applies to really any type of game, whether it's a one shot or you're in a campaign. Is making sure that the players have a reason to be there, or at least have a reason to uh, I guess interact with everybody else. One of the things that I do for one shots is, I'll often have pre-generated characters, but I'll also have like maybe one paragraph of backstory for them, just to kind of give the player a idea of who the PC is. Although they don't obviously don't have to follow it. But what I also do is will kind of lay out who all the other characters are, and how they feel about them, to start getting some type of interaction between the different players. And this is obviously more easily done during a normal gaming group, or some
Hmm.
people who meet all the time, or in a campaign, because they've gamed with each other for a little bit longer. But I found that that helps a lot as well. Kind of giving the players a reason to be there. And again, you'll still run into those situations where a player is like, oh, my character would never do this. He's just going to leave. Which all right, that's great.
Sure.
It was good gaming with you. I have heard of some GM saying that to somebody. Said like, all right, yeah, your player can leave, but then they're done. They're out of the scenario. And I think for some players, they kind of lose that realization every once in a while, that, oh, well, yeah, you do need to have that buy-in a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, those are what I typically do to kind of keep players engaged. Let me throw it back to you. What else do you do for to kind of keep people engaged in the story as you're going through it? Because you've definitely run a lot broader and diverse role playing games than I have.
One of the things that I try to do, and we do have a question which I'm going to get to in just a moment. Which, thank you for your question. One of the things I try and do is when there's a part in the action, and I really like to say, okay, I describe the scene, and then I will say, okay, what does your character think about that? And I'll kind of go around the room and see, like, oh my gosh, I'm scared of this. I feel this. I feel that. I feel these. Instead of saying, what do you do? Because that implies action, and maybe someone else thinks about something that they want to do and they don't get the opportunity to do so. Asking them, like, hey, what do you think about this? How do you feel about this situation? I feel like that helps. And I also try, when I'm running in person, I keep a little tally list, and I'll actually like tick off like as I've talked to each person to make sure that I am actually making sure that everyone's engaged, and I'm also always looking for eyeballs. Obviously, if I'm running online, I can't do that as easily. So I will just kind of keep the Discord up and kind of keep a mental note of how often I've heard from each player. just to try and make sure. And especially if you have a shyer player, you may need to coax them and say like obviously communication is key. Making sure that that player is comfortable with that and saying, hey, I'm going to try and call on you a little bit more because I want to continue your engagement, and always giving them the option to pass if they don't feel comfortable saying that because of whether it be anxiety, shyness, or what have you. But I try and keep that player involved and find out what they like and try and give them more of that. So our question is, what is your favorite monster or villain to use in a horror scenario, and how do you best incorporate it? Great question.
That is a really great question, and that's a very hard question. Oh man. Okay, I need to think about this for a second. So,
Sure.
what? Go on. Sorry.
No, sure.
So I would say on. Oh wow. So in Call of Cthulhu, there's a lot of different like mythos creatures, varying all over the place. I would say that my favorite one. Actually, my favorite one is the Bayaki. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right. That's how I pronounce it. But it's basically like this. It's one of these, and that's a great thing about Call of Cthulhu is a lot of these creatures are indescribable, which makes it great for a GM to try to describe. But they're basically this like flying creature that is usually summoned as like a servitor. But I love using those because they're great. They're great creatures to use to just kind of attack the PCs. They're great for like guarding something. They're kind of this like generic use monster within Call of Cthulhu. Outside of that, I love. Also in Call of Cthulhu, there are Shoggoths, which are these like
Giant
amorphous
amoebas.
giant amoebas. Think of like the blob creature
Yeah.
from the Blob. They're great. I have a custom scenario that I wrote that I've run for a long time now, where I'm actually going to be running it online here soon, so I don't want to spoil it. But they're great because you can change them around so easily. And what's even better, there is another creature related to a Shoggoth called a Shoggoth Lord, where it's basically like this Shoggoth that has evolved and become more intelligent, and so kind of mimics what a human looks like. And so you can have like people be these Shoggoth Lords
Oh
too,
my.
which are great when your players are interacting with them, and then all of a sudden they turn into this huge, massive creature that just completely destroys them. But there's so many great things or creatures out there.
I think for me, to answer the question, um, I think I have two.
Mhm.
One, I really like vampires, but not the traditional, not the fanciful vampires that we have a lot today, but the like Count Dracula, um, charming looking predator, that kind of like
Mhm.
very scary, like looks like a dilettante, speaks like a noble,
Right.
but in his heart is just a tiger, and is looking at you as if he's going to just find a way to eat you. And I think my other one would definitely be mind flayers. I love
Mm.
illithids; they're great. And I think the best way to incorporate mind flayers is to just latch on, much like the Cthulhu monsters, to their absolutely ununderstandable, indecipherable alien nature. You don't understand what all of their influences are, and you don't need to. You just need to know that this thing is scary and it wants to eat your brain.
Well, and that's another great thing. One of the best pieces of advice I ever heard about running horror games was again from Ken Hite. And if you don't know who Kenneth Hite is, he has written a lot of role playing games. I think he was the main author of Trail of Cthulhu. He's got a lot of really great stuff out there. He's one of the guys who runs Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff, the podcast. At Origins a couple years ago, he did a seminar where he basically was just talking about how to make your horror role playing games better. And one of the things he said, and this has always stuck with me, is change up the monsters. Make them something that the players aren't going to expect, and like remove the common tropes that players expect. So, like with what you said, vampires, make them not die by sunlight, and make them not afraid of crosses, because those are the first things that your players are going to try, and when it doesn't work, it's going to really throw them for a loop. Make it where like werewolves, they're not affected by silver bullets. In Call of Cthulhu, there are creatures called Deep Ones. Change those up. Change up their appearance, change up what they can do, and that even I think amps up the horror in a game, because the players are expecting one thing, and when you change it up, it just completely throws them for a loop. And I've seen it cause PCs or players or however you want to phrase it, to kind of take a step back and go, oh, we need to regroup. We need to get out of here right now. And for me as a GM, when I hear something like that, I know I'm doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Absolutely. Those twists and turns really help. We have another question. How do you include horror in RPGs where the player characters are empowered superhero types as opposed to normal people?
So that is a great question. So Pulp Cthulhu is like this. So horror is my number one favorite RPG or genre of RPGs. My second favorite would be anything pulp. So Hollow Earth Expedition. If you've ever played that, I love that game as one of my favorite games of all time. Pulp Cthulhu, which again is like Indiana Jones meets Cthulhu, and in those games you're definitely dealing with players who are larger than normal. They're they are the adventurers. They're the Indiana Joneses of the world, who can basically do everything. It is a little bit more. I don't want to say it's more difficult to include horror into that. You have to make the situation a little bit to your advantage to bring in that horror. So, for example, if I was dealing with if I wanted to bring this into like a D&D game, I think there are a couple things that you can do, because I'm going to assume in a D&D game your adventurers are a bit more powerful. They've reached kind of those epic levels. Potentially they've got magic items. They can kill dragons. All this. How do you turn that into a horror? You could start taking things away from them. You could, have them enter a town where the town is just, covered in this, like nullified spell that just removes all magic. So now all of your magic users are gone. Ravenloft does a great job of this. At least I haven't read all through the fifth ed version of Ravenloft yet. I've got the book. I just haven't read it all yet. But at least in the second edition Ravenloft, none of the gods or most of the gods could not kind of reach in to Ravenloft, and because of that, your clerics basically could do nothing, or they were very limited in what they could do. So you start taking away some of the things from them. Another thing too is, and this is really more on the player side, is you start kind of describing things a little bit vaguely. This goes back to setting the mood as well, because if you even though the players may not be, or I'm sorry, the PCs may not be powerless, if your players think that they are, or they're up against something a little bit, that they've never come across, or more powerful than they are, then they're gonna, their PCs will start acting that way. And one way to do this is to just start describing things very vaguely. One of the, and again, this is from the first Ravenloft book, or the box set. What you can do is, instead of saying something like a werewolf burst into the room, because if you just describe, oh, you're in a hotel, you're in a room in an inn, and a werewolf jumps in, what do you do? I mean, the players are going to say reattack. That's going to be their the first thing that they say. But if instead you describe it as something like a low growl is heard as a large shadow block. I wrote all this to the side, so. A low growl is heard as a large shadow blocks the light from the bottom of the wooden door. Suddenly, the door splinters as something heavy crashes into it from the other side. A howl penetrates your ears as the door is fractured by the repeated blows. If you start describing something like that, they don't necessarily know what's on the other side. They may guess that it's a werewolf, but that description is gonna throw some players for a loop a little bit, and it may start them to, I think, second guess their abilities. And in a situation like that, their next move may be we jump out the window. They don't want to see what's on the other side of that door. So Those are kind of some of the ways that I would do that.
I definitely agree, and I think that we can, as storytellers and as game masters, we can really look to cinema as for
Yes.
inspiration. Because if you look at really good horror and really good, like one of my favorite episodes from Supernatural is called Howl the Wendigo. Um, it is a very psychological episode, and you don't
Hmm.
see the monster until the very last scene when they actually find a way to kill it. And again, it actually goes back to your point of like they don't have any of the tools that they need to kill the monster, and they just have to make do and figure it out. Um, which, like I said, I think you catch glimpses, but you don't know exactly what it is. One of the characters like injures the monster or thinks he does, and the guy runs around, and you just see a glimpse of the monster reaching down, grabbing the guy by the head, and ripping him up into a tree. If anyone's watching Vox Machina, which is on Amazon, one of the recent episodes that they have a bunch of, I think they're wraiths.
Yes.
That episode's horrifying. But it does that same thing because I know the stat block of a wraith as a game master, but like I'm looking at it, I'm like, this isn't how wraiths are. But if you're the game master, yes, it is exactly how they are. Tweak those things and do something unexpected. I had a player character one time challenge a lich to a duel, and the lich pulled out a Vorpal greatsword and said, "Fool, you've had maybe 30 years to practice the blade. I've been studying for thousands of years," and then killed the player in front of the rest of the party. That part was planned. Because the player wanted to change characters. But it was a great moment for the rest of the characters to be like, "Oh my goodness, the fighter who is so powerful is now dead. What do we do?" And there was this moment of absolute panic, and I just got to sit back and relish in it. So,
Yeah, and I think that you're absolutely right. It's in a horror game, you don't want to just blankly describe what's there. You want to give those hints. That the creature that lurks in the shadows, and you only see out of the corner of your eye, or the werewolf that bursts in. Don't say it's a werewolf. Never say it's a werewolf. Just describe it. And that's for me. Just describing something on the fly is not easy. And so I would highly recommend make notes. There are some websites online, I don't recall them at the moment, but where they have basically like just loads and loads of descriptive terms that you can
there's
use.
one in the Keeper's book. It has an entire
Okay.
like eldritch
Yeah.
things. Where it says like like my wife's least favorite descriptor, ropey, amorphous,
Yep.
spongy, all these fantastic gross descriptors. Yeah, but those are really good.
And I think the new the monster manual for Call of Cthulhu is called the Malleus Monstrorum. I think the new version of that came out last year. I think they actually have that too, where for each creature they give like alternative descriptions for it, so that you have those adjectives at your fingertips, so you don't just say, oh, there are 5 deep ones that walk onto the beach. You can describe these reptilian creatures whose heads poke out of the water, and things like that. That all of that. I don't care what level you are. If the GM can do that the right way,
Hmm.
your players are going to turn tail and run.
Absolutely. It looks like we have another question. Can you speak to how you'd incorporate horror when there are no supernatural elements behind the problems, and nothing supernatural is ever revealed to the player characters, even at the resolution?
Sure. So there are other types of horror other than supernatural horror. The one so one of what? Hold on a second. I'm gonna screw this up. Give me 1 second.
No problem.
This sorry, put in my headphones. This is the book that I was talking about, and I realize now that you're probably looking at this backwards. But Nightmares of Mine, if you can find this on like eBay or something like that, it's totally out of print right now. But I think you can still find it fairly cheap. Definitely pick it up. But this is the one where Ken Hite goes in and talks about all the different types of horror. And supernatural horror is only, and of course I can't find what they all are right now. But supernatural horror is only one type of horror. There's body horror where, and it probably depending on your audience, with what the pandemic and all that going on right now, it's probably not something that your players want to go through, but it's something that could happen. If Good example of this is hopefully no spoiler alert here, but The Stand by Stephen King. That is absolutely body horror. Where you've got this disease going over the nation, and everybody's turning on each other because of that. I think Walking Dead is a good example of that too. The zombies there are not caused by something supernatural. It was something natural that caused this. You can also have I think like psychological horror, or think of who the villain could be. I think a great example of this would be like a serial killer, who is which you could fit into any type of role playing game, where the killer is just killing for whatever reasons that they have. You get to choose the reasons. In fact, there's a book for I want to remember the name of it, and I don't see it on my shelf at the moment. But there's it's called Slasher. It's for World of Darkness. In the book it's about 300 pages about how to create serial killers for your role playing game. It's one of the most unique books that I've ever gotten for a role playing game. But it's got a lot of great information. But all of those you can kind of pull in. What I would say too, steal from other sources. You brought this up, from movies, from books, from comic books, from video games, anything that you can find. I am constantly doing that. I mean, obviously, if you're going to be publishing your material, don't steal from others, or at least give them credit.
Absolutely.
But steal from other media that's out there.
And
take tropes and put them into your game. Absolutely.
Twist them and make them your own. For Dungeons and Dragons, there's actually a really good resource, Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. It goes through all those different kinds of things. It talks about cosmic horror. It talks about body horror. It talks about psychological horror and so on and so forth, and those kinds of things, and how to incorporate those different things into your game.
And as I need to reread this book again because it is so good. But he does go in and talk about exactly that. How can you incorporate horror into like your modern game, or a post-apocalyptic game, or fantasy, whether it's high or low fantasy. Everything like that.
I actually just put in a link in the chat that's to the Goodreads if someone's looking for a particular copy of it. I'm sure you can find some PDFs that you should buy.
Yep. Yeah.
But it looks like it's on sale on Amazon. There's a couple of copies, but it looks like it's actually a pretty valuable book. It's about $70 now, so awesome.
Then I got very lucky getting mine.
So I've got a question, and obviously if anyone has more questions, please let us know. But how do you create, build, and maintain an aura of tension when you're running horror RPGs?
Again, it comes down to mood. It really does. I think there are a lot of different tactics that you can do. Even if you're in the worst case scenario where you're in like a con environment where you've got tables all around you, obviously with lighting, setting that ambiance, having the music in the background. Having the lighting, if you can do that. The one warning that I'll give about lighting is, it's awesome to play by candlelight, but it's also very difficult to see things by candlelight.
It's true.
So just kind of keep that in mind. Having props that kind of helps build that tension of aura as well. The vague descriptions. One of the best techniques that I've actually found is that if you start talking slower and doing it in a lower voice as you're describing something, or as the players are moving through somewhere. So for example, I did this one, or a friend of mine did this once, where we were going through a house. We were exploring this house, and we entered this room, and he started describing about how the windows were slightly open and a breeze was blowing the windows in, but there were no lights on, things like that. That kind of sucks you in. The players lean in a little bit more. And one of the most effective things that he did was he was doing that, and then he slammed his hand on the table and described something that happened, and everybody jumped. kind of the equivalent of a jump scare
Hmm.
in a role playing game. But those incorporating all of those, I think really kind of helps maintain and build that aura of tension. Now the thing is, and I think this advice is given in a lot of different places. You have to break that tension.
Hmm.
You can't just keep doing that tension for 1 to 4 hours long, because it'll wear out very quickly. And so that's even why if you watch like horror movies, that's why they have those jump scares where it's a cat that jumps in from out of nowhere, and everybody's like, oh, it was just a cat. It relieves that tension. That's actually a good thing, because if you had that tension going the whole time, it would get, I think, too much, and it would wear out very fast, and so you don't, it's not as effective, is what I'm trying to say.
Excellent. So as we've got a couple more minutes, I've got, I guess, just a few more questions for you today. So what would you say has really helped you on your journey to run, fantastic horror RPGs, and what advice would you give to others who want to set off in their own direction? And I'll be taking notes now.
Um, you know, there are really a lot of great places online to get advice for role playing games, for horror role playing games. Just to kind of throw a plug out there, yogsothoth.com, yog-sothoth.com is a Call of Cthulhu role playing game site run by fans. It's at least 20 years old. It's been around forever. Um, you can get on there and you search through almost 20 years of forum archives discussing anything about Call of Cthulhu or any other horror role playing game for that matter. Um, there are other great resources out there. I've already mentioned Nightmares of Mine multiple times. There's another really good one from a guy named Graham Walmsley called Stealing Cthulhu. That I think you can only get in PDF version now. That's a great book. It basically tells you how to change up all of the Cthulhu mythos. It gives you really great advice. I actually, after I read that one, it completely changed my mind about how I run Call of Cthulhu games. Um, I love watching other GMs and how they run horror games or different games. In fact, whenever I run a published scenario, if I can, I try to find an actual play of it and kind of listen through it, just to kind of get some ideas for how it's going to go and really how the other GM did it. I'll give a plug. I don't know if you can see the pin here. Into the Darkness. It's a group of players and GMs that I'm a part of. Anybody could join. Where we will run games and publish them to YouTube. So just search for Into the Darkness on YouTube, and you'll probably find, I think, probably they're close to 500 videos now of games that we've all run or everybody has run. Um, just watching actual plays, I think, is one of the best things to do to figure out how other people do it. And steal from them. I mean, again, I say steal, but I mean,
Sure, sure,
what I
sure.
mean is, yeah, borrow their ideas, steal their plots. Like I said, look to movies, look to TV shows. There are some great examples of how you can pretty much do any type of genre with horror. Like with the supernatural episode you mentioned, and with Vox Machina.
Hmm.
Those are, I think, are great examples, and some of the things I think are probably obvious once you see them, but sometimes you just kind of have to see that obvious thing in order to pull it into your game. And again, vary things up too. If you become kind of a one shot of doing the same thing over and over again, your
Yeah.
players are going to start expecting it. So vary things up, and what it comes down to is just kind of steal things. I've got all these books on my shelf. I have absolutely not run every single one of
Sure,
those,
sure.
but I read through most of them and I get ideas. And that's part of it. Another thing that I do too. Yeah, so I've got this book here. I've had for when did I start writing this? I date all the entries in here since 2011, so a long time. It's basically a commonplace book for me. And what I do is whenever I come across an idea for either a scenario or something that I want to throw into a scenario, or even just like this plot, or even just like a fragment of an idea, I write it in there. And so I've got 11 years worth of ideas in there, sometimes I go back to them and try to turn them into something, and sometimes they suck, and sometimes they're really good. But I definitely recommend start writing these things down too, because I'll listen to things like one of my favorite things to do is listen to like history podcasts, and there history is what's the phrase that truth is stranger than fiction. Some of the things that have happened in history, you can absolutely pull into your games, or at least turn it into something. And so, all of these things, that's kind of how I pull everything in.
Absolutely.
And I will say there are definitely better. I would not consider myself a great GM. There are definitely others out there that I look up to, but it really comes down to are you having fun, and are your players having fun? And it's a game, so that's why we do it.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm going to disagree because I think you're a fantastic game master, having watched you run,
Well, thank you.
and having talked to a lot of your players as well. But I will say, so I absolutely 100% agree with you when it comes to looking at the insights that other game masters have, and because I actually, when I run my scenarios, I have. I usually I'm usually part of a Facebook group that's like for game masters of that particular thing. Also, I will, when I'm running published scenarios, I'll also look and see what other veteran game masters have done in theirs and the experiences that they have. And then there are also some guides that are excellently written online that I've also written through. So I'm looking at not just one perspective, which is my own, but multiple perspectives of other game masters and what they're doing and what they're learning and the things, and I pull from each and every one of those things the things that I like and that I think my players are going to enjoy. So I absolutely agree with you on that. So
another thing to remember too, is that a lot of, especially if you're running a published scenario, the authors of these scenarios are still around, or for most of them are probably still around. And so, with a little, Google foo, you should be able to, find out, an email address or an online name. I've never had an issue reaching out to an author of a scenario and asking them a question, or asking for advice on how to run it, or anything like that. Most everyone, actually everyone that I've ever done that to, has been more than happy to talk to me about it. And a lot of times too, you have to remember, especially with like something that was published, that you go through an editing process, and so a lot of their original ideas were probably taken out, and so they may be able to give you some other things to throw in there that your players aren't going to be expecting.
The director's cut of a scenario.
Exactly, it's exactly what it is. I love that. But yeah, reach out to whoever you can. That's
Excellent.
we're all, again, for the most part. I know that there's always exceptions to the rules, but the gaming community, I think for the most part, in my experience, is always pretty open to talking about these things.
We did have a question about the Alien RPG, which we touched on a little bit earlier. You said you'd played it. I have not played it, but I have a lot of friends who have, and it's been getting a lot of good buzz. It's, I think, a very sci-fi survival horror, and if what I understand, the game master kind of plays as the alien trying to hunt the players, kind of thing. Yeah, so that sounds cool.
It is. So when it first came out, all I could think of was, I will fully admit, when it first came out, I was like, this is just a, they're going to recycle some material. They're just pasting Alien on top of it. I didn't have high expectations for it. And then I started listening. I listened to a podcast. I think it was the Miskatonic University podcast. They did an episode with the author of Alien before it came out. The Alien RPG, I mean, and he kind of sold me on it, and then I played it, and it is pretty amazing. It has a lot of really good mechanics for building up that tension. That it uses stress die, and you slowly start to accumulate more and more stress die as you go through the game. And it does absolutely play like Alien or Aliens, depending on how you want it to go. It is absolutely worth picking up. And I'll say too, the starter set for it is amazing. It's only like, it's not, I don't remember how much it costs, but it's not too expensive. It's like maybe $30 or $40. But the value you get in that starter set is better than any other starter set that I've seen. So I highly recommend checking that out.
There's a lot of good starter sets out there. That is a bold claim. I like it though.
It is. Compared to like Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, there are a lot of really good starter sets out there, and that's a great thing
Call of
too.
Cthulhu's is really good too because
Yeah,
it comes with like what, 4 scenarios
yeah,
and all the
it comes
dice
with
and
that.
everything
It comes with all
pre-gens.
the dice. Um, yeah, I mean, I can't really complain too much about it. Now, as I say that, I guess most of the starter sets out there are starting to become pretty good. But another thing too to remember is a lot of the times there'll be quick start games out there or from the company which are free. So
Hmm.
even if you don't, now they're not going to have the full set of rules and all of that in there, but it's going to at least give you a taste.
Yep.
I do that a lot with some RPGs, or if you can get your hands on something from like Free RPG Day.
Yeah.
That's horror related. I know Delta Green and Call of Cthulhu, they put some
Yeah.
stuff out every
And
once in a
and a
while.
lot
So
of times those free RPG things are available for free for download from the publisher for you to run because that's what they're for.
exactly.
They're free promotional materials, and they put a lot of work into those, and they're often very very good. The
Yeah.
Derelict is one that's very good.
Hmm.
Under a Black Sun from Star Wars is not horror, but it is free RPG Day, and it's very good. So I guess the last question for today, which by the way, our person in here said that you were a great GM. And they
Well,
also
thank
said
you.
the Alien Starter is great. Um, so if there's one thing that our audience would take away from our conversation today, what would it be?
It's try a horror RPG. I think a lot of people out there don't, because they're afraid that um, they're not going to enjoy it. Even if you don't like horror, I would say that there are still ways to have a horror RPG work for you. So try it out. You're not going to know if you like it or not until you do. And if you don't like it, great. At least you tried it. But don't be afraid to try it. A lot of cons now, and we're slowly starting to have more and more kind of get back to the normal con sessions. But even online games, there are some that it's only like an hour long. It's an hour intro to Call of Cthulhu or Chill or some other horror RPG. Try them out. It's only an hour, so you're not losing that much time. And again, if you find you hate it, at least you tried it and But if the alternative is you find that you really like it and you want to start exploring it more, then you've opened up that door.
Absolutely. Excellent. And we all know that opening up doors in horror RPGs is never a bad idea.
No, every door you find, open it up
Yeah,
without
absolutely.
abandon.
Yeah, and immediately run inside. All right, well,
Yep.
Tyler, thank you so much for joining us for today's first game GM one-on-one, the Hallmarks of Horror. If you like the content here at Open Heart Games, please give us a like on Facebook, follow us on Twitch. If you really like what we're doing here, feel free to also subscribe here. Check us out on our YouTube channel. And keep checking out what we're doing. A portion of every month's sales go directly to Extra Life, benefiting our Extra Life chapter here in Roanoke, which is Carillion Children's. So with that, thank you all so much. Thank you for joining us today, Tyler, and
Thank you.
take heart.